We reached a point in 2021 where it was time to make a big change in our life circumstances. We were living in the Washington, D.C. suburbs, we were working from home, our only child was leaving in the fall to start her first year in college in Scotland. COVID had thrown everything into chaos, and we had minimal commitments holding us to our current location. We were totally bored with our living situation and our environment. We'd lived in the Northeast U.S. for most of our lives, and we had nothing left to see in that area. We were also feeling somewhat lost facing the change in life from our daughter moving away. It seemed like we had reached a point where we had an opportunity to create a new life. We wouldn't call it a fork in the road. It looked like an opportunity to take an exit ramp off of a bumper-to-bumper traffic-snarled beltway and take the slower, more scenic route. We had been thinking for a number of years that we should do something new once our daughter left for college. We were living in a high cost of living area to have proximity to our work in D.C. and access to good public schools. The area generally had a great standard of living with decent but expensive housing, great access to any goods or services you'd need, but it was also composed of the standard dense suburban sprawl. The pace was hectic, the people career-focused and all stressed out, and the traffic terrible. If we didn't need that proximity to D.C. for work and schools, paying for the high cost of living there was kind of a waste. So we started thinking about how we could have a better quality of daily life at a slower pace in a more people-oriented location. We'd been traveling for years for both work and pleasure and had been throughout the U.S. and most of the EU. We were really attracted to what seemed like a more human-oriented quality of life that we had seen in the EU on many trips. Walkable cities and towns with a sense of history, beautiful squares with outdoor cafes, clean and efficient public transportation, and life that unfolded at a slower, smaller scale. Like many people who think after a great vacation experience, we had the "we really should move there someday" fantasy. So we thought we would try it out and see if it really matched our impressions. So in the spring and summer of 2021, we sold and gave away about half of our belongings, put the rest in storage, moved out of our house, left our cars at a relative's house, and we headed to the EU to spend the fall scouting for places to live. It was a big and stressful move. It was jumping off into the unknown, but it was also exciting and liberating. Our plan was to visit the areas we'd been researching and get a feel for the local lifestyle, find a house or apartment to rent or buy, and then head back to the U.S. and start the process to ship over our car and other belongings. Most of our friends thought we were crazy, but they were usually too polite to say that out loud. We weren't naive about the reality of moving to the EU, and we have relatives in the EU who we visit on a regular basis. And in DC, we worked in the international development community with co-workers composed of people from throughout the world who were living in the US as expats. So we've been surrounded with an international perspective for the last 25 years. We knew the pros and cons and the issues with the countries that we were interested in exploring. We were especially attracted to the Netherlands, and we'd seen much of the country. We dreamed about a laid-back lifestyle of biking around canals between villages and visiting the rest of the EU through short flights or train trips. So our initial goal was to try to set up a life in the Netherlands. We spent a lot of hours searching the real estate sites for homes in Utrecht, Leiden, and The Hague, and around Amsterdam. We researched residency requirements and taxes, and we talked with some expat advisors about our specific circumstances. I have dual US-EU citizenship, so we could get residency in really any of the EU countries. But as we learned more about the tax burden in the Netherlands and some of the other countries in the EU, we started to rule out a few places. It didn't seem worth it to pay a yearly wealth tax on our total assets or give as much as half of our assets to the state when we passed away, especially since we'd already paid full retail in the US for things like health insurance and college tuition for our entire lives already. The best deal for U.S. expats at that time seemed to be Portugal, with lower taxes for expats, a great climate, and lower-priced real estate. So we began looking at various regions in Portugal and browsing the real estate sites to get an idea of the housing. It seemed really promising, and we were committed to the general idea of making the change, regardless of where we landed. So we closed down our home in the U.S. and headed over to Portugal to do a long-term scouting trip. We spent a few months traveling through Lisbon, the Silver Coast, Nazaré, Porto, and then later Madeira. We met with real estate agents, we looked at flats and checked out neighborhoods. We met with a real estate lawyer to learn about the purchase process and costs. We tried to live in each area for a few weeks in a furnished apartment to get a feel for the town. We drove around and checked out adjacent towns and other places that were recommended for expats. And we explored grocery stores and other retailers to see what they carried. And we sampled a lot of Portuguese wines. Lisbon was amazing. The climate in the fall was great. We loved the laid-back vibe, especially after coming from Washington, D.C. We had a great apartment in a perfect location in the Baija, walking distance to everything, perfect weather. It was our first trip to Lisbon, and we loved the architecture and feel of the city, the Tagus River, the lighting from the carriage lamps in the evening, the small cafes in the squares. We were working throughout that period, sometimes at our computers at the kitchen table, and other times at a shared office space a few blocks away. So this was closer to a true expat experience than a vacation. Have dinners at small local restaurants, drinks at outdoor cafes, walks around the Chiado, Barrio Alto, and the Alfama. We rented a car for a long period and traveled around the Silver Coast, from Sintra to Nazaré to Coimbra, then down to the Algarve. Portugal has a great highway system. The restaurants are mostly good, large U.S.-style grocery stores that were plentiful. Public transportation in Lisbon was convenient, and the natural beauty was stunning. Finally, we flew to Madeira and lived for a few weeks in an apartment in Funchal, and then later for another week or so near the Forum. Driving's a bit crazy with steep, narrow roads on the edges of cliffs, but we loved the endless views of the sea. So, first, the good. This was the most amazing experience of our life. It was exciting, new, all-encompassing, completely different from a vacation, mainly because we didn't really have a home to go back to. We were at a new stage in our lives. We were living and working on the road. We were focused and engaged. Living longer term in these new places was really special. We could settle in, fill the refrigerator, wander around the neighborhoods, and get in sync with the people and the culture. We didn't have that sense of being pressured for time that comes with knowing you have a flight home in a few days. It gave us a new and greater appreciation for the lessons of longer-term, slower travel. But we were losing enthusiasm for making the full move to Portugal. We were less impressed with the available housing in Portugal. The housing prices were overheated in Lisbon and many of the other places that we liked. Or we saw nice apartments and houses that met our expectations, but we weren't really all that comfortable with the surrounding area. We weren't having that much luck finding a house that we could get excited about, which really reduced our enthusiasm for the expat adventure. We were also especially hit by feelings of isolation. Our main contacts with people were with the local real estate agents. But this trip was temporary, and we assumed that once we moved here permanently, we could take steps to meet new people. Language was a big issue, especially outside of Lisbon. Portuguese can be a difficult language to pick up, and we had started working on it before we arrived, but we weren't really progressing very quickly, so it was an ongoing concern. It made day-to-day activities like visiting restaurants and grocery stores a lot more difficult and stressful. And it made us concerned about our pending all-in move and our ability to navigate more complicated transactions like healthcare. We also had a sense of being unmoored that was a real ongoing concern. We were planning to return to the U.S. around Christmas and had no place to live other than an isolated cabin in a remote area of the Catskill Mountains in the middle of winter. We were planning to find an Airbnb or short-term furnished apartment to move into while we were preparing to make the full move. And most of our remaining possessions were inaccessible, tightly packed in several storage units. So we were facing a difficult situation once we got home. And since this trip was during COVID, we had to get formal COVID tests one day before boarding any flights, and we faced government-managed quarantine if we tested positive. So that was another source of stress. It really made us worry about the complexity of eventually having to deal with a serious health issue that could arise when we were living in Portugal. So by the end of that trip, we were happy to get back to the U.S. to rest up and reassess our situation. We eventually went back to Maryland and moved into a 2-bedroom condo that was about a third of the size and cost of our previous D.C. suburban townhouse, while we came up with a new plan. The full-time expat experience was going to take a lot of effort and risk, and may have a disappointing result. We spent a lot of time thinking about how to make it work and alternatives. Maybe there was a way to minimize the downside while retaining what we really liked about the experience. That opened us up to the idea of becoming part-time expats or slow travelers, spending 6 or more months overseas throughout a year, and then the remainder at home in the U.S. Reducing our U.S. expenses opened up enough funds to allow us to live in the U.S. and travel longer term to Europe and elsewhere. No real need to become residents and address visa issues or pay foreign taxes. Instead, rent a furnished apartment overseas for a few months, see how we like it, and then if we found something that looked like it could work out long term, get the residency to allow for a longer stay and find a more permanent place. So we adjusted our target and we moved on to the next phase of our adventure. And we're going to capture video of it this time so you can learn from our mistakes. Hit the like and subscribe buttons and join us. Thanks for watching.